Okay, so I don't think these following examples will work in an American court, and I don't think my law insurance covers international courts, but this religion is about all life on Earth. So I'm going to list all the countries the US sabotaged in order to protect the interest of American corporations. Keep in mind that these operations were conducted through secrecy, deceit, lies, and denial. So there could be more countries where evidence never came to light. The first is any attempt the Native Americans made to establish sovereignty. Sure, eventually they got their nations, which are symbolic more than anything, and not to mention it was only after the worst genocide in all of human history. We Europeans massacred a hemisphere of people almost in their entirety, stole their land, and claimed to be the civil ones. The next is America. When America was founded, it was declared that all men are created equal and deserve life, liberty, the pursuit of happiness, and justice for all. None of that was given to Africans in America or their descendants even after hundreds of years and a civil war. They were dehumanized on an industrial level for centuries. That kind of psychological trauma doesn't just go away, and those dehumanizing sentiments still carry on to this day. The oppressor likes to hide their hatred through doublespeak, technicalities, whoopsie daisies, and anything from gerrymandering to devaluing anything associated with the oppressed, in this case, African Americans. And also in America, we killed a lot of Chinese people who built the railways with poor safety measures in place, if there were any to begin with. But the next country is Mexico. The US likes to think the Mexican American War was its first real war, but they invaded Mexico right after Mexico spent years fighting off France. It wasn't a real war so much as kicking someone when they were down. And don't get me wrong, Mexico was an evil empire at the time, but America has taken up that very same mantle. Now we move on to Hawaii. It was a kingdom before the US made it a state because the Queen seemed to threaten the interest of American sugar companies established in Hawaii by the descendants of white missionaries. So they sent an army, overthrew her, and established one of the sugar owners as head honcho. This man's company is the one we know of today as Dole. That was the guy's last name. Next was Cuba, Puerto Rico, the Philippines, and Guam. These were colonized by Spain, and the US didn't like having Spanish authorities so close to the US. So they aided liberation groups in Cuba and Puerto Rico with promises of freedom, and Guam and the Philippines were just part of the package since the war was with Spain, and America was just another colonizer who took the lands. They lied about the freedom because they didn't want foreign countries so close to the US, and they also had American corporations in Cuba and didn't want to treat the Cubans fairly, so they made Puerto Rico a territory, and in Cuba they installed a corrupt dictator that allowed American corporations to exploit the native population and resources. That's going to be a recurring theme in these examples. The Philippines and Guam didn't fall under the category of too close to the US, but they were still subjugated. Guam became a territory where, despite being a tiny island, 25% of their land is owned by the US military. The people of Guam serve in the American military, yet they are neglected by our government. The Philippines also had liberation armies, and once they won, they were looking for America to keep their promise. But America decided to keep control over the country for themselves for over 40 years, during which time the Japanese Empire invaded, and America did nothing to protect the people of the Philippines, who were technically American at that point. And a quick side note, Japan was forced to open the country to free trade agreements by the US, but they were given unfair deals by Western powers and felt like their only way to not end up oppressed is to become like the oppressive imperial Western powers. Japan was minding its business, but we inspired them into an evil empire. And in our defense, we were inspired by the Middle East, Northern Europe, Northern Africa, and Russia, who I'm sure were inspired by others. Next up is Nicaragua. In the early 1900s, America had powerful corporations in Nicaragua, and a new president rose to power with promises of regulating these corporations. The US did not like that, and the Secretary of State works with propagandists and the Marines to bully the president into stepping down, and he had to for his own safety. It wouldn't be long before America does the same to Honduras for the same reasons, except this time it wasn't someone in the government, but an American civilian who owned a banana company and didn't want to pay his fair share to Honduras. He was wealthy enough to buy a navy ship, fill it with mercenaries, and use a private army to invade Honduras, and the American government knew about this, but they didn't like that the president was trying to help his people, so they sided with the American businessman and forced the president to stand down. The new president was such a puppet that not only did he give lucrative deals to the banana businessman, but he used Honduran taxpayer money to repay for the cost of the navy ship and the mercenaries. By the 1950s, America is a superpower and has created the CIA. Both America and the USSR participate in sabotaging one another by sabotaging countries who align with either side. The Cold War was anything but cold. The fighting that took place in so many countries were bloodbaths. Just because that bloodbath never reached the US doesn't mean other people didn't go through hell because of us and the USSR. In 1953, a new leader was elected in Iran who promised to take back control of the country's oil from a British oil company that we all know of today as BP Oil. The British threatened the new leader and even got help from the CIA. Using taxpayer money, the CIA bribed local leaders and clergymen to spread lies about the new leader. People were paid to attack religious leaders and make it look like the new leader was behind it, and people were paid off to demonstrate against the new leaders. All of this creates an atmosphere of confusion. The new leader is arrested and imprisoned, and in his place comes a man Soprano fans will know as the Shah of Iran. This guy gave the oil to both the British and the Americans, was such a brutal dictator to his people, it led to a revolution that empowered a new party based on their hatred of America for sabotaging their country, which is understandable. But also important to note that these decisions in all of these instances of sabotage were made by a few people in positions of power in secrecy away from the public's knowledge or through lying to the public to get our support. Because even we, the American people, get sabotaged by the government and rich corporations. But next up is Guatemala. And again, for the same reasons, in the same way, a new president wants to end the monopolies of American corporations and return Guatemalan land to Guatemalans. But the CIA gets to work setting up a radio station to spread misinformation to Guatemalan citizens. They arm exiles and bomb parts of the country to sow the sentiments of war, and the president knows the US won't stop until he steps down, so he does. And the puppet president gives the US government and corporations what they want and goes on to destabilize the country, all because the US sees any attempt of a foreign government to provide for their people and regulate American corporations as communism, which is evil and must be stopped, no questions asked. In the 1960s, many African regions were gaining independence from European powers. The Democratic Republic of Congo has just elected a democratic leader. Nothing wrong so far, but the Congo is rich in uranium and the nuclear race was in full swing. America didn't want Russia to get a hold of the Congo, so they made the first move. They funded opposition to the democratically elected president and again used misinformation and bribes to turn the people against him, and he was ousted. The puppet government served the U.S. At the expense of the Congolese people, and it's soul-crushing to realize this country is still being sabotaged because of its natural resources, although this time it's mostly for cobalt. After that, there was an issue in the Dominican Republic. A brutal dictator is in charge, but what sets the alarm bells off for America was that he might endorse communism. So he has to go. An American-friendly leader is installed, and that was the end of that. But let's mention Haiti. Haiti has been screwed over simply for being the first African republic established by former slaves. America and France have crushed any hope this country had for prosperity, even if they say they never broke the law. France still imposed a massive war debt on Haiti after it had ravaged the lands for its imperial ambitions, and the US didn't allow Haiti to participate in free trade, essentially imposing an embargo on the island for being black and free. We move on to Vietnam. Everyone knows about Vietnam. The French wanted to keep them under subjugation, so they called the Americans to crush the Vietnamese, despite the leader writing a letter to America asking for help, since America at the time was supposed to be known for being all about freedom and against colonial rule. But no, the Americans side with the French and we start an illegal war against the Vietnamese that splits the country in two. The US isn't happy with the leader of their half of Vietnam, so they work to remove him. But the opposition leader that the US picks is so bad, the US is dragged into a decades-long invasion of Vietnam that ends with our defeat. Spoiler alert, this isn't the last time that happens. We return to the West, where in Brazil, a new leftist leader is looking a bit too communist. There is already an opposition leader ready to launch a coup. The US don't have a problem with this guy, so they just send reinforcements off the coast of Brazil and stand by in case they're needed. In Chile, the CIA does such a good job at overthrowing a leader and establishing an evil dictator to protect American companies that it leads anyone trying to piece things together down a rabbit hole. But it's safe to say at this point, pattern recognition takes place and we know better. We move on to Africa, but I forgot about the country of Liberia. When Africa was being carved out by European powers, America got a piece of land in the east of Africa that they called Liberia. It was created to send back newly freed slaves in America back to Africa. Unfortunately, those newly freed slaves were so American they enslaved the local population and pillaged the country, proving that skin color is just an illusion and we truly are all the same. But in the 80s, America set its sight on Libya. For a while, the leader Muammar Gaddafi has been funding terrorist groups, but when there was talks of uniting Libya and Chad, the US saw this as a no-no and set in motion a coup. It led to a puppet leader in Chad that plunged the country into conflict, and that was enough for the plan of unity to end. So America, not caring about the instability they just caused, moved on to Grenada for having a communist leader. They overthrow him, install their American-friendly leader, and move on. The next country is Panama, where the US has control of the Panama Canal and a dictator who has served the US well but has gotten a bit cheeky. After the dictator Noriega gets charged with drug trafficking in Florida and an American is killed in Panama, the US overthrows him and establishes a more level-headed puppet leader. The country of Panama wouldn't get ownership of the canal until 1999, and not even 30 years later, we got another white collar criminal trying to steal it. We reach Afghanistan, the Vietnam for the millennials. In late 1989, the USSR invades Afghanistan and America funds its enemies, figures who would go on to establish the Taliban and the ISIS. The American backed fighters win, and the Americans consider the job done and move on, not knowing they will have to return to fight the very people they just armed. While the US returns to fight the Taliban after 9/11, they also target Iraq to take out the horrible dictator Saddam Hussein. The man is taken out and the country is left in ruin. Anti American groups are left unchecked, and one of them, known as ISIS, starts to take off. Eventually, ISIS dies down, the Taliban regain control of Afghanistan after a long, costly war that we didn't win, and the country of Iraq becomes so corrupted, religious fanaticism has taken over and led to things like the age of consent being lowered to 9. God help all those poor girls in that country. When, of course, the atrocities American soldiers were told to ignore that involved Afghan men enslaving and forcing themselves on young boys. America has never been the only evil in this world, but it has been a major player in maintaining evil in power. The last coup the US launched was in Libya. Gaddafi was a mix of dictator and man of the people, but after the Arab Spring, the US, along with NATO, felt like Gaddafi had to go. But at the last moment, America decided the whole regime has to go. The country was left with a power vacuum that plunged the country into a civil war, and we don't care. But America isn't immune to sabotage. One example is how foreign gangs and even governments will use cyberspace to steal literally hundreds of billions of dollars from Americans through fraud. It's something that happens every year and in so many ways that the US government has very little control over it. Most of the money that is stolen from us is never recovered. As we speak, we are getting sabotaged by foreigners and it's out of our hands. Sound familiar? In the 2016 election, Russian President Putin was suspected of bolstering divisions in America and using misinformation to cause confusion and unrest in order to manipulate the election results. And personally, I think he did do it, but that it wouldn't have mattered. Americans have lost so much faith in their government that a Washington insider like Hillary Clinton wouldn't have won. Americans are so brainwashed, they thought, since these Washington insiders keep selling us out to the billionaires, let's elect a billionaire to save us from the politicians who sell us out. We are literally in idiocracy right now. If we decided to change the way our civilization functions, we would have to be mindful of how much control corporations have over our world in order to prevent societal collapse. All the corporations that are abusing us and poisoning us are also the pillars of our human civilization. Canadians in Greenland need to be careful because even if their intelligence agencies can counter anything America throws at them, there is the possibility that Russia or China will launch false flag attacks and further divide the West to weaken the iron grip America has on the world. Even though America shouldn't rule with an iron fist, neither should the Russian oligarchs or the Chinese Communist Party. Let freedom and righteousness rule the world. These types of governments that sabotage other nations also sabotage their own people. We Americans are painfully aware of that. From bad actors in the government to companies like McKinley or United Health Insurance or private equity firms, we are being lied to, cheated by, and robbed by American corporations. We need to stand up for ourselves and the rest of humanity because out of all the corrupt nations that people have to fight, we have the best shot at actually beating our corrupt plutocrats. Thank you for your time, and may God help us all.